Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our California ISO BAA level market power mitigation for price formation enhancements working group series. My name is Brenda Corona. On behalf of the California ISO, we welcome you to our working group session number 14 for today, February 21st, 2024. For today's meeting, let's just go over some few housekeeping reminders. As this call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. During these collaborative working groups, we are tending to stimulate open dialogue and discussion between all stakeholders who are here today, submit them verbally or also through chat. We also like to invite you, if you do submit questions through chat, send them to all panelists. To ask a question during the call, you will select the raise hand icon located in the lower toolbar, and it'll add you to our queue. This is to add any verbal comments during the call. As well, please introduce your full name and affiliation before speaking. For those who are only dialed in the phone line, just press #2, and Adrian, my event producer, will let me know who's on queue. And also, when you do have a question and you're expecting a follow-up question to the question or the question answered, do not mute yourself. It'll lock you at that moment that you do mute yourself within the raise hand opportunity. And so with that, those who do submit questions in chat, feel free to add on the affiliation towards your comment so we know which organization is asking that comment specifically. And for today's agenda, we will go over a few topics, but first, Juan will kick us off with today's goals and review the previous BAA level market power mitigation session we had a few months ago. And then also we'll have James and Stevie go over stakeholder discussion for BAA level market power problem statement assessment. And then we'll give it back to Juan to go over some policy recommendations for BAA level market power mitigation. There is a few slides on here that are more slimmer than others. So you'll see like our team will go over each slide and discuss fully, but also the next bar will be like a stakeholder discussion in terms of the potential solutions to stakeholder comment with Juan. And then I'll go over the next steps as well, a few meeting reminders as well, the stakeholder symposium as well that we have coming up in October. The next slide is just an overview of the initiative stakeholder process. We are currently in the pre-proposal development phase as well. We have posted a straw proposal, and also we are working towards a few items within this working group series. So our team and I will be helping out, give those exact items and deadlines prior to moving forward through the proposal development phase. So at this time, I'll go ahead and introduce Juan. He'll kick us off for the next few slides.
All right, thank you, Brenda, and thank you everybody for joining us. Really appreciate everybody's comments. I know that we're here to talk about BAA level MPM today, but really appreciate the very thoughtful and robust comments that we received on our sprint, which was the previous 3 sessions where we kind of returned the conversation to scarcity pricing. So I do want to open up with that thank you and let you know that we are in the middle of digesting those, and we'll be getting back to this community, ASAP on that, as well as, the potential for a couple of new wrinkles of how to engage outside of the actual sessions themselves when it comes to the working group topics. So really excited to be back here in front of you guys. So just really quickly, if we could move to the next slide, please. So we had brought this slide up at the last BAA level MPM, kind of the goal of the working group, and we appreciate the feedback that we've been hearing on working groups and progress and, kind of driving towards potential solutions and developing policy as a result of. So right now I'm marked 3 items done, right? We've level set on BAA level MPM. If you take a look at the slides, I believe it's slide 9, I have links to all of the different presentations that we've done. We've talked about the different issue and challenge areas. Now, you'll note that here I have done on problem statements. This is an iterative process. If a new problem statement is to arise, right, we're definitely going to bring that up. That's something that we will dive into and talk about here together as a group. So please don't take that green done as, this is closed. This is a stakeholder-driven process here, so we want to make sure that we are responsive to that. But we're moving into the assessment, and that's kind of in progress. So today we'll go over kind of at a very high level the past discussions that we've had. I want to validate those problem statements as they were represented, as you have commented on. And really, we want to be able to identify ways to measure those different issues or challenge areas and how a solution might be able to effectuate that problem statement. That way we can assess the impact of those potential solutions and really get, as a community, alignment on the priorities so we can move into the next step, which you see down here, which would be resolving those issues. So if we could just quickly go on to the next slide, please. So the goals of today's working group, just to kind of reiterate, I think it's important to start with the end in mind. So for this session, we're hoping to walk away at the end with the following. We've got a clear understanding. We've kind of caught ourselves back up to BA level MPM since we had the sprint and really focus in on scarcity pricing. We're hoping to validate those problem statements as they've been presented, will be presented here today, and again, that's including the feedback that we got on the different comments that we received from stakeholders, rather, and then as a community, find ways to assess impacts of potential solutions. Not getting to those potential solutions, although we'd be open to hearing those if you have some ideas, but come together and have an agreement on how we would assess those potential solutions. And then we want to spend a little bit of time, again, since we're kind of coming back from the sprint of a different topic, to address the stakeholder feedback that we received in comments. So looking forward to facilitating that guided discussion. So if we could move to the next slide real quick. This is on our stakeholder initiative page for PFE initiative. So if you need to reference anything that we kind of talk about here today, you have all of the different sessions that we have spent on this topic linked there. And if we could go to the next slide here. So the final or the last link there, session 8, where we talked about the BA level, the MPM problem statements and data. We had that group discussion on those problem statements. We also had a presentation. If you did not make session 8, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at that link. We had our Department of Market Monitoring provide the first stakeholder presentation within the working group here for PFE, and they presented some data and discussed some key points to kind of help us all understand the mechanics and impact of current BA level MPM and the WIM. And then we also shared some information on a potential grouping approach. Now, this was an illustrative example, was not meant to serve as any kind of a solution, but again, to illustrate how grouping would work, and we had quite a bit of feedback on kind of additional information for that, so we're looking forward to diving into that discussion. So without further ado, and since we did spend a bit of time, right, a couple of months here since we've gotten into BA level MPM again, I'm going to go ahead, let's ask for the next slide, and I'm going to hand this off to James Friedrich, our policy lead here, so that we can dive into today's conversation. So again, if you do raise your hand for the comment, I just want to reiterate it. Go ahead, just wait to put your hand down because we are looking for that very engaged conversation. So James, go ahead and take it away, please.
All right, thank you, Juan. Okay, so as Juan mentioned, it's been a few months since we've talked about BA level market power, about 3 months, as we've been looking at some of the other topics in this initiative. So we sort of want to review the problem statements that are proposed for BA level market power, which includes 2 that we've discussed in this forum already, and 1 new one that's suggested in the stakeholder comments. And the end of the presentation today will sort of get into the stakeholder comments in different ways that the CAISO is planning to address some of the comments that were raised. So first of all, problem statement number one, what we're trying to do on these slides is to differentiate the problem from the root cause and the impact. So, you know, trying to identify specifically the root causes and the impact and try to separate that from the problem statement. So it sort of helps us better define what the problems might be relating to BA level market power. But just for a quick refresher, you know, in the Western EIM, we have the concept of BA level market power mitigation, which essentially tests BAs in the EIM for structural competitiveness whenever they are price separated from the CAISO or the rest of the EIM. And this provides sort of, as opposed to local market power mitigation, this provides sort of a structural competitiveness assessment in which we're testing to see whether or not the three pivotal suppliers can exercise market power over the region's power balance constraint, essentially meaning, you know, whether there is enough competitive suppliers out there to yield sort of competitive pricing conditions within the BA when they're price separated from the rest of the EIM. And in that construct today, the California ISO is the reference for the California ISO's BA prices are the reference for competitiveness in that assessment, such that whenever there's a BA within the EIM that has a marginal energy cost that's higher than the CAISO BA's marginal energy cost, that's the trigger for which to test that BA for structural market power. And so this has been a discussion that we've had a few times in this working group, and I encourage you, if you would like to refresh your knowledge on BA level market power or its history or its mechanics, the links that Juan provided on the previous slide are very helpful, including one from the last session in November. So the basic problem statement number one for BA level market power that we're here to discuss is that BA level market power tests may underestimate a balancing area's true structural competitiveness. And the root cause behind this problem is that today, the current BA level dynamic competitive path assessment, or DCPA, which is a term to describe essentially the market power test, how the market identifies whether or not supply is competitive or not. It tests BAs in isolation and does not consider external available supply. And so when you hear about the concept that we've discussed in this working group about a grouping approach to BA level market power is essentially to undo this root cause that says instead of testing balancing areas in isolation, meaning you only are looking at their own internal supply relative to their internal demand, if there's a way to group BAs together who might be price separated together, meaning that they have competitive supply flowing between balancing areas, that you could use that external available supply in helping a balancing area pass the market power test. And so that's the basic idea. And the impact of this problem in the market is essentially that balancing areas in the Western EIM may fail the DCPA, which is the market power mitigation test, more frequently than their actual competitiveness justifies, and subjecting them to mitigation too often. So a couple of things in this impact I want to break out. First is that when BAs fail the DCPA or the market power test, it means they're subject to mitigation, which is not the same necessarily as actual mitigation. So being subject to mitigation means that the CAISO will identify whether or not the resource bids are above two reference prices, either the resource's default energy bid or the competitive locational marginal price, which in this context would be the CAISO's marginal energy cost. And so only if the resource bid is higher than either of these two reference prices, does the resource actually get mitigated? And so when we had the Department of Market Monitoring here last time in the session in November, they showed data to show the breakdown of how often BAs in the EIM are subject to mitigation, and within that subset of times, how many times their resources actually have their bids altered as a result of the mitigation. So just want to make sure that's clear that subjecting a BA to mitigation is not necessarily the same as actually mitigating a resource bid. And so this is sort of the problem statement that we've used to justify the consideration of a grouping approach that we've discussed in detail in this working group, including in the November session. We had a detailed discussion about a grouping approach and some of the pros and cons there. And so we wanted to make sure, as we're trying to move this concept forward, to see, essentially our goal today is to sort of allow stakeholders another opportunity to comment on the problem statements if there's something missing or something that needs to be included or considered that's not being included for the CAISO to think about as we move forward to the next stage. So I'll pause there and to see if there's any questions or comments on this problem statement before moving on.
Okay, James, let's give it a moment here, because this is a crucial part of the working group process, right? We're going to continue on, and as a working group, start talking about, how one could potentially address this problem statement. But it's important for us to have kind of that clear understanding as a community that this is framed appropriately, and we want to move ahead on addressing this problem statement. So, okay. Dan, let's go ahead and unmute Dan, please.
Hey, James. Hey, everyone. This is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. So just wanted to echo all the things that you started out with, Juan. I thought just a great set of comments that came in from stakeholders, and that reflects really well on the CAISO's process here, too, just in the way that you've been organizing these sprints and being really receptive to stakeholder input. So thanks for that. But specifically on this, just since you're asking for some thoughts or feedback, I'm curious to the extent when we say does not consider external available supply, can you sort of talk me through the limits to available supply that is considered within it? And probably the main example I'd be thinking of is any intertie market activity that EIM entities currently have with the CAISO through HASP, but not through EIM, and then potentially how base schedules and non-participating resources get picked up in the DCPA.
Those are good questions, Dan. So my understanding, my very basic understanding is that the DCPA will measure, what it's essentially doing is looking at a sort of a supply and demand balance and using the power balance constraint for the BA as the constraint with which to evaluate the competitiveness, as opposed to the traditional use of the DCPA is to test an individual transmission constraint. And so how it does that is essentially for any individual BA that's being tested, it's looking at a sum of its demand, which is essentially its forecast, and compares that to the internal supply available to that entity. And so in terms of how that concept of internal available supply is calculated and whether that's net of either EIM transfers or in your question, sort of HASP approved exports or imports, I guess, depending on the BA, whether that's net of that or not. I don't think it is. I think it is just the total supply available in that BA at any time. And then, of course, the 3 pivotal supplier test looks at, portfolio ownership of the supply and looks to see if, absent the 3 highest suppliers, there would be competitive supply, meaning that you take out the 3 highest suppliers, could you still meet the demand, that BA's demand, with the supply that's left over? So we can do some more to sort of illustrate or break that down, but that's my basic understanding.
Yeah, that's helpful, and I think I've only been able to skim through a few of the comments that were submitted, but I think Pacific Core submitted some really good comments about just wanting to look deeper into some of the January market outcomes from this year, which I know that PETS was working on a report on that. But I think this is an area where that could be a good test case to look at how transfer constraints materialize for EIM entities that were both using transmission rights to export from the CAISO or from another area and import into their BA alongside their sort of ETSRs on the same path, to kind of look at how this like dual use of a transfer path gets consumed by the market, and what impact that has on the results of market power mitigation, just from the standpoint of market power mitigation looking at the ETSR, not necessarily the total capability, and that tends to lead it to be very subjective to how much transmission is brought to that ETSR and the methodology that the entities are using to establish their transfer capability. And I'd also be curious too, just sort of when thinking about that transfer capability, and for those entities that are using the ATC methodology, just sort of when and how that snapshot gets taken of the kind of, say, colloquially, size of the pipe that's represented there by the ETSR. I know those are way down in the weeds, but since we're going in the weeds to try and come up with some solutions here for future mitigation and price formation, it feels worth kind of digging into if it makes sense to you all as well.
Yeah, so I know that the work is underway to create a January report, a report on the January events, and what we can do is to relay this feedback. That would be sort of an interesting case study, or part of the overall metrics to be looked at in terms of how BA level market power applied on these days, to see if we can learn anything useful.
Yeah, or just, I'm sure that team doesn't want to slow down their work for getting that out, but it could be something that could be, as we kind of consume that report in this group, we could consider, is there some future follow-up that we want to do that's really specific to what we're trying to work on here?
Mm-hmm.
But thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, no, good point, Dan. We'll the team is actively working on it. Let's see if we'll see if we can't get you guys a little bit of an update on expected timeline for that. But yeah, all on any material would be great to leverage as we kind of move forward into the solution stage here. Let's go ahead and unmute JK. JK?
Hey, good morning, Juan, James. Thank you for giving the opportunity for stakeholders to be involved in this process again. Really appreciate this spring discussions. I have a question, but not sure if this is the right time to ask it. Will we discuss about the triggering conditions and the task in the DCPA later in the slides, or this is the right place to discuss? Because I feel like the problem statement is related to that, but the question I'm going to ask is more technical. So do you think it's a good time to ask?
So let me see if I get this right. So is it potentially that there's a missing problem statement related to the way the BA level test triggers? that's the fundamental concern?
Well, so when I'm looking at the problem statement and it says may underestimate BA's true structural competitiveness, I'm asking myself what it means. And James, I think you just gave an explanation. And in PG's previous comments, we actually mentioned that the triggering condition and the test, the three pivotal tests, they are based on two different market powers. That's what we're understanding. So we can either elaborate a little bit more here, or we can wait until when we come to the details of discussing the triggering condition and test itself.
Okay. Yeah, I think that so I understand the particular comment. I think it might be okay now to just for everybody's awareness to go ahead and explain what you mean. And then I think it's a good time now to talk about that.
Okay, so it's just a little bit background for everyone. So the CAISO's being referring to the assessment we're doing here as a DCPA, which is similar to the DCPA that CAISO's been doing for the local market power mitigation within each BAA. And that type of market power is local market power. It is because the price the price are separated due to the transmission congestion. And in that local market power mitigation, the DCPA is triggered and assessed based on the congestion of a particular transmission line. So in that case, the triggering and the test are based on the same factor, the same type of market power, which is a local market power. And it is due to the market economically are segmented due to the congestion. But when we do the BA level market power mitigation here, the triggering condition is the bindingness of the import transfer constraints, while the three pivotal tests are done based on the BA level power balance constraint. So these two are two different constraints. And the first constraint is the binding in the triggering test is due to, one importing constraint is congested, and therefore it can be considered a market power is exercised by whoever can cause the counterflow of relieving that congestion and make more supplies available to that BAA. While in the three pivotal tests of the power balance constraint of that BAA, it is the market power that could be exercised within that BAA and say if there's a pivotal within that BAA to manipulate the price by setting the clearing price of the marginal unit. So we believe these two different market powers are triggered and tested in the inconsistent way. And it really depends on what is the objective of the market power mitigation, which type of market power we want to mitigate here.
Thanks, JK, for the background. I hope that made sense for everybody. Could you, in your view, JK, do you think that the issue would be found based on the trigger or the three pivotal supplier tests?
So the question is the objective here, right? So what type of market power we want to mitigate by modifying the DCPA itself, even without doing the grouping test, we can address the issue if the goal is solely to mitigate one of the market power. But if the goal is to mitigate two types of market power, or just the import market power or interregional transferring market power, then I'm not sure DCPA is the right method. Sorry, I'm not responding in a way. I know you're asking more in terms of the market, but I'm responding like mathematically, which will be the right technique to use.
Mm-hmm. Juan, did you have a comment before I ask my question?
No, I did. I wanted to highlight that JR's hand did go up right after JK's comment, and I was wondering if that was maybe in response to the last thing she stated there, James. So I think why don't we go ahead and let you ask your question, and then we'll see if, or JR, why don't you weigh in, and if you could put a pin in that question, James, and let's see if it's related. And JR, if it's not, we'll come back to you. How does that sound?
Yeah. So I just had a quick question on something that JK said, which was that the DCPA is based on the congestion, effectively on the congestion price. And the congestion price is essentially made up of the actual portion of price change due to actual congestion, and then a portion of that which is virtual, right? Which is used to kind of direct the power flows. Is the DCPA based on, is it distinguishing between the actual and the virtual, or is it based on the combination of the actual and virtual congestion price? That was really my question.
Okay. Thanks, JR. Yeah, sorry about that, James. Go ahead. You may be on double mute, James.
Of course. One thing to clarify, you know, at least in the EIM today, the dynamic competitive path assessment that applies at the BA level is not necessarily a flow-based constraint test. So the test is not activated based on by monitoring the congestion on the ties between balancing areas. The test is activated by comparing the power balance constraint shadow prices of the various BAs to the CAISO. And if any of the BAs have a higher power balance constraint shadow price than the CAISO, then they're tested, which implies potentially a flow or price separation from the rest of the market because there are import constraints. So it's, I don't know, I'm kind of saying like 2 + 3 = 5 and 3 + 2 = 5. Like you're kind of saying the same thing, but it's not, the test is not actually triggered based on by monitoring the congestion between the balancing areas. It's looking at the prices only, which implies, you know, import congestion. And so the basic idea, and this is something that we talked about in the history of the test, it's not, so back to JK's question, the objective is something different than local market power, because you have local market power in the Western EIM already and in the CAISO. BA level market power or structural market power is different in the sense that just as in local market power, when binding congestion or binding transmission constraints can isolate areas within your transmission system from the rest of the system, and they become price separated. In the same way that happens on a local level, that can happen at a balancing area level. If you're not able to, if you're a balancing area and you're not able to accept competitive supply from another BA, your suppliers within your BA may be able to exert market power over the balancing area itself through the power balance constraint, because you know, in order for the power balance constraint to solve, you have, you know, suppliers within that area must be pivotal. So they're very similar. I mean, they're similar concepts to local market power. It's just applied at the balancing area level. And remember, the reason why we had the balancing area level test at all in the first place in the WIEN, which we talked about in some of the working group discussions in the past, is that, you know, unlike the CAISO balancing area, the EIM entities that at the time when the EIM was first starting were joining the market didn't necessarily have a structurally competitive balancing area. You know, the high concentration of resources owned or operated or managed by a single entity. And so in that case, the idea was, well, in the case where that BA becomes price separated from the rest of the EIM, you know, that pivotal supplier may be able to exercise market power over third-party loads within the balancing area. And so that was the whole genesis of the BA level market power idea, and what we're still trying to connect or correct for. Now, one last point before I go back to the comments is that in the early days of the EIM, that sort of setup was fine because you had, Pacificor, Nevada as the second, and you had sort of geographically isolated balancing areas. There weren't very many of them in the EIM, but now you have 20-something plus balancing areas who each connect geographically or otherwise to other balancing areas within the EIM. And so testing balancing areas individually seems not to make sense anymore, given how large the EIM is and how many opportunities there are to get supply, not just in and out of the CAISO, but any individual EIM BA can be getting power from a number of balancing areas in the EIM. And the market power test does not give that BA credit for any competitive transfers it would be receiving from somebody else within the balancing area. And so that's sort of the genesis of what this discussion is about, and this problem statement comes from is, there's so many BAs in the EIM, maybe it doesn't make sense to have this single isolated approach anymore. And then the final comment is then to think about how this applies to the EDAM, because in the EDAM, we'll adopt the approach of the EIM today, and you'll have BA level market power on an isolated basis, each BA tested by itself. And so the question then becomes, if the EDAM grows, just like the EIM has grown, is this isolated market power test still appropriate, or do we need to group BAs together in certain ways? So sorry, that was a long explanation, but I hope that provides some context from the previous sessions about sort of what the overall problem is and the history of that. So Juan, I'll pass it back to you.
No, James, I appreciate that. And again, for those of you who maybe missed it, if you take a look at, I think it's really kind of the working group session number 4. There's a lot of good information there. So if you go to slide 9 and click that link, there's also the recording on the initiative page. But that garnered a lot of kind of engagement here. So Callie, I see your hand. JK, I think we had a hand go up and down. Let's go back to JK. James, I think you had a question for JK. I'm not sure if that was in there. So let's go to JK. Callie, we'll go to you, and then JR, we'll let you respond there. JK, go ahead.
Oh, I thought James had a question for me.
Yeah, James,
sorry,
I kind of cut you off there. So that was my fault. Go ahead.
No, I did say that I was going to respond with a question, but my response was the one I wanted to give. And just to see if JK had any reaction, because I was trying to respond to the question about like what type of market power are we trying to protect against in the BA level construct, and maybe that helps JK think more about her question.
Yeah, I think that was actually very, very good response. And it make me thinking, because when you say when the market power mitigation was designed, we're thinking of for the BA whether it's able to get the competitive supply from the transfer, right? But then that part is consistent with your triggering condition. But I don't think it is somehow, this is consistent with the BA level balance, power balance constraint test. And another thing to think about, what makes the local market power DCPA is integrated solid method. It is because the idea of market power is represented by the price separation, and the separated price is exactly the shadow price of the constraint you're testing. Now, in this BA level market power mitigation, we don't have that. The shadow price of the power balance constraint for each of the BA is not the price separation that you have at a BA level. So in order to address that consistency, my personal understanding is more about, what constraint you choose for triggering and for testing, and then, the price separation you're looking at. It's more of a technical issue than, of course, after a set go of what type of market power mitigation you want to do, it's more of a technical issue to address by choosing the right constraint. And if we can decide that very clearly, going into the grouping method may not be necessary.
So this is an important point, so I want to make sure this gets good airtime. And these are good comments. I appreciate them. In the original justification of BA level market power back in 2014, 15, the concept of really, if you think about it, I don't think there's much of a difference between the concept of local market power and BA level market power. If you think about the local market power being a local area within the system, and just as that would happen with congestion going into some local area, you could define a balancing area as a local area that's congested from the larger market and the larger system, and all of the suppliers within that local area can potentially exert market power in that case, or at least there may be the incentive to do that, and that's what the test is for. So I hear the question, but I don't really think that, in my mind, I don't see why you would have a differentiation between, local market power is identifying price separated local areas, and BA level market power is doing the same thing. It's just that the area with which you're defining is a balancing area and not a single node on a system or a collection of nodes.
Very brief,
kind of,
yeah. I have a very brief comment on that. I think that's also important because, if we think at a topological level, that's exactly, as James described here. What is difference if we just make the two things related? For the local market power mitigation, what we do is we test for the binding transmission constraints, right? And then we look at the counterflow of that constraints. The constraint shadow price is the price separation for that node where the transmission line connecting to from the other part of the system. Now, pull it the analogy to the BA level market power mitigation. We look at a BA. What we do is not testing that binding transfer constraint counterflow. We do not perform the pivotal test on the transfer constraints. Instead, we do the power balance constraint test for that BAA. So, think about when you do the local market power mitigation, instead of doing the counterflow test on the transmission line, which is constrained, you put it to the nodal level. You're saying whether this node, I have sufficient generation to meet the demand. That will be what exactly you're doing at a BA level market power mitigation now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I still don't see it really any differently, but I hear the concern. I am interested if others have a similar way of thinking about it. That maybe will connect the dots here.
Thank you, JK. Callie, appreciate your patience. That hand's been up for a little bit here. Let's go ahead and go to Callie Wells, please. All right, bear with us, Callie. If we could please unmute Callie.
Yeah, hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. Am I unmuted on your end?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, I had raised my hand, I think, after JK initially was making a comment, and then after that whole discussion, I have quite a bit of thought, but I don't want to, I know we've taken up quite a bit of time, but at a high level, I think we completely agree with what JK is trying to explain. I think it's something that we've been commenting on from day one on this. And I think we see the issue. It's almost in our minds like you're taking aspects of a local market power mitigation test, and especially that triggering mechanism, and trying to apply it to a BAA level or system market power condition. And I think because of the mixing and matching there of the trigger and the test, or the type of market power you're trying to address, you're actually seeing that issue pop up in your results. And DMM, when they presented on that analysis, I think it was the last working group or maybe 2 working groups ago, you were seeing that this mitigation was being triggered most frequently during low load and high renewable hours. Those off-peak and the off-peak hours and shoulder months had the highest frequency of this mitigation being triggered. And I think that should raise a red flag. And in our minds, it did. And it's like, okay, this trigger that you guys are using is not the right trigger for when you should be testing for BAA level or system market power. So that was kind of the initial comment I wanted to say in response to JK's initial comment she made. But then also, James, just another way to think about it in our minds, and maybe this will help make that distinction, is it's the demand number that you're using in that test to figure out if you should actually mitigate resources is different. So in local market power, that demand is the counterflow. What is the demand for counterflow on that transmission line? Or, you know, maybe the analogy here is what is the demand for counterflow on that transfer constraint? But that's not what you're using in the BA level calculation for that 3 pivotal supplier. You're saying we're going to take this binding transfer constraint as the trigger, and then instead of using the demand for counterflow on that transfer constraint, we're actually going to just use the demand in the BA level area or in that BAA. So hopefully that will help in your minds kind of identify like a main difference between the two, and why maybe using the transfer constraint as a trigger to test for BA level market power is different. And it's almost like mixing and matching the two approaches for the 2 different types of market power. I don't know if that was helpful, but just thought I'd chime in there.
That does make me think about it a little differently, and I appreciate that. In the context of well, I guess one way to think about it is then if you wanted to apply, well, let me just say I appreciate that. That's another way of thinking about it that helped me sort of understand the concept a little more, and maybe I need to wrestle with my thoughts about it. But that makes it more clear in my mind, and hopefully for others too that are following along.
Yeah, of course. And like I said, I think you're seeing that issue manifest itself in the analysis that DMM showed a couple working groups ago, to where it just, those weren't the hours and the months you would expect the mitigation for BAA level to be triggered.
Thank you, Callie. And just, you know, we will have a little bit of time to your first point. That is actually, you know, problem statement number 3, right, which is something that we heard from both the last session as well as the comments. So, you know, we look for. I hope that you'll raise a hand, kind of expand on it a little bit when we get there. But let's go to JR. And just so that, just really quickly, I know we have spent a lot of time on this, but again, I cannot downplay how crucial this point is within this working group concept to start getting towards creating those solutions. So we can take the time that's necessary. This is, after all, this is for you, the stakeholder community. So JR, go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, so I'd really like to thank everybody for their comments right now. It definitely got my noodle working. Thank you for James, JK, and Callie. I actually have a concern that I wanted to express that seems to come more from an operational standpoint. It would seem that what market power mitigation or the BA level is doing is impeding the operational right of the entities to participate or not participate. So the price separation is caused, in the example that you gave, James, the price separation is caused when we, as a BA, do not allow imports into our area, right? And where there can be some technical constraints for why we're not allowing imports into our area, but there can also be some operational elections for why we're not allowing imports into our area, right? Maybe we don't want to take the excess renewable energy from a BA that's near us or around us for whatever reason that would impact our units and how they operate. And it sounds like this would take that away from us effectively. And it would allow you to override that decision from our standpoint for our internal BA system for the sake of the, in this case, EIM or EDAM situation. Would that be a correct assessment, or am I just way off and completely misunderstanding?
No, I don't think you're way off. You know, it sort of relates to, I guess, part of the participation into the market. You know, when your comment sort of made me want to bring it back to like an entity joining into the EIM, and part of that process when an entity joins into the EIM is to demonstrate to FERC to have market-based rate authority. Essentially is the authority granted to settle on energy transactions using bid and market prices instead of cost-based, you know, some sort of cost-based settlement. And part of that justification in the EIM is that, you know, CAISO has market power mitigation type tests to, you know, protect from instances of market power in the case where you have balancing authority areas that own or operate a majority of their supply. And so overall, that's sort of what is trying to be protected from here, is that if there were cases in which a balancing authority area is participating in the EIM and not able to have its sort of incumbent large supplier providing the resources and generation within the balancing area to compete with EIM transfers or other types of external supply, and you have third-party loads or other types of demand arrangements within that balancing area, the test is intended to protect those loads from instances where the internal incumbent supplier can essentially bid or exert market power and bid prices above competitive levels and subject those third-party loads to those market clearing prices in that case.
Right.
And so,
overall,
yeah.
I would expect that since the DMM essentially monitors the bids that we are putting into the EIM market, right, such that we cannot exceed our costs as negotiated or as accepted from CAISO, whether you just went with the default values or you negotiated values, that should already be effectively performing that action. And price separation due to our willful decision to not participate is a result of one of the reasons why entities joined EIM and didn't join the RTO directly, right? They joined EIM so that way they could choose to participate or not participate according to what is conducive to their BA. And it just, as I'm hearing it, it sounds like we're looking to strip that power away from them, which is kind of, again, the reason why they are an EIM entity and not an RTO entity.
So the only thing I would add to your comment is that in general, market participants can bid whatever they want to. You're only subject to those cost-based triggers that you're mentioning if you're subjected to market power mitigation in that particular interval. And the idea would be that if you don't have a BA level test and you're not subjecting the resources within that balancing area to these sort of tests, then you're free to bid whatever price that you want to. It's only under instances with which you're being mitigated are you sort of then your bids levels are compared against the default energy bids or the competitive LMPs in your area. So there's still a triggering that still has to be done. And that trigger doesn't happen in 100% of intervals.
Right. Okay. And that's where I would actually go with what both JK and Kelly are saying. I don't necessarily follow why it needs to be at the BA level and is insufficient at the local level. But that's something we've probably covered in some of the other sessions, and I just need to go back and review that. I just kind of wanted to voice the concern that I had as I was hearing the back and forth, and especially I happened to have missed the last meeting, and what Kelly said really perked up my ears when it happened to be in a situation where you had low load, a lot of excess gen, which is pretty much a situation where you might want to say, from an operational standpoint, no, I don't want imports. It's not a technical issue, it's an operational decision, right? And that would be the exact time that we're getting the market power mitigation that's essentially forcing you to open up your imports when you don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's, thanks, JR. So there is a, maybe Juan or Brenda can help me by posting the link in the chat, but there is, one of the previous sessions, there was a discussion about sort of the history of the BA level market power concept as it relates to the EIM and the formation of the EIM. And that might be helpful to sort of review what BA level market power mitigation is doing or trying to do that local market power mitigation is not doing or not trying to do. So we'll try to look to see which session that was, and then we'll post it in the link. And that applies to anybody who's interested, can look for that in the chat.
All right, thank you.
I'll put that in there shortly. And just quick reminder, please do state your affiliation, JR, with SRP, but just please do state your affiliation, and then keep an eye on the chat here. I will send that to everybody with a slide deck for that session. So thank you for your engagement, JR. Appreciate that. Let's go ahead and go to Stuart.
Pick up on what JR said there. I don't agree that what we're discussing here is stripping away power or stripping away decision making. I recognize that, you know, there's operational constraints that need to be applied in the market, and that's what his grid operations are going to do, irrespective of what the merchant has bid. And nothing here changes that. It just changes how and when you become subject to the cost-based settlement. That's all we're talking about, is those mechanics. We are not stripping away power, in my mind, or stripping away decision making. If you need to limit the amount of import that coming in from, say, solar, because you've got thermal that needs to run for voltage support or whatever, you're going to do that. It's what we are discussing here is, are you going to become subject to cost-based settlement or not, and what triggered it, right? So hopefully you agree, JR, on that one.
Yeah, actually, JR, if you want to respond to that, please go ahead and raise your hand. Thank you for that, Stuart from LADWP. Again, please do state that affiliation. So, Stuart, thank you. Let's give JR an opportunity to respond here. Yeah, go ahead and unmute JR, please.
So really quickly, thank you for that. I do see the point that you're making. I also had some concern in the fact that when we are EIM participants, we don't necessarily receive the benefit in our settlements for alleviating congestion for other EIM participants. That's something that, to my understanding, is essentially reserved for full RTO participants. So again, on our part, sometimes it could be, I'm not saying it ever actually has been, but it could be an operational decision that, we kind of want to take our ball and go home, right? If for whatever reason we decide we want to take our ball and go home for this interval or for this time frame, we want to make sure that luxury or that privilege is protected.
Thanks, JR. No, I appreciate that. Again, and this course is vitally important, right? This is a community of stakeholders, so we encourage the back and forth with our CAISO subject matter experts, but also with each other. So, okay. All right. So for everybody, that history of the BA level MPM construct is in the chat there for you to take a look at after today's call. But James, I do not see any other hands raised or questions in the chat. Do you want to give some closing thoughts on this problem statement, or would you like to go ahead and move on to number 2?
Let's move on to number 2. Okay, so the second part of the problem statement is that there's potential for the BA level market power test as it exists today to exclude legitimate uncompetitive conditions, with the root cause being that today the balancing area level DCPA does not apply to the CAISO balancing area, either in the EIM or as of right now would not be applied into the EDAM as well. And so the problem statement here questions whether or not that is reasonable or not. And the impact of that is that the CAISO balancing area is always considered structurally competitive, even in cases when it wouldn't pass the same competitiveness tests that apply to other EIMBAs and then apply to the EDAM as well. And so, generally speaking, the CAISO balancing authority area is a structurally competitive market. You can look at, although not a perfect proxy in this case, but you can look at measurements of structural competitiveness in the CAISO within the Department of Market Monitoring's annual reports is one way to sort of look at it. And there have been some within the stakeholder community that say or think that the exclusion of the CAISO within these tests is, would maybe excluding legitimate uncompetitive conditions. And in the case where in the CAISO is the reference for competitiveness, because the CAISO in the DA level test is seen as the structurally competitive balancing area, and so its price or its marginal energy cost is the reference for which the mitigation applies to the other balancing areas in the EIM. If for some reason the CAISO balancing area itself were not structurally competitive, and therefore it's being used as the reference to apply structural competitiveness to the other balancing areas, then essentially you could have a competitiveness test that's using an uncompetitive price as its reference for competitiveness, which may not be appropriate. And so I'll pause there. I think that's been discussed in the working groups in the past as well. And so I just wanted to leave this one up here to see if there are anything that the working group should consider before thinking more about whether or not this, including the CAISO in the test, is appropriate or not. And I guess this does assume first that, given the triggers that we've been talking about and whether, independent of whether or not folks think that the trigger for the BA level test is the appropriate one to use, if one could find an appropriate trigger to assess structural competitiveness of the BAs, is it reasonable to include the CAISO in that test or not? So I'll pass it back to you, Juan.
No, thanks, James. I think that's a good point there. So again, kind of similar to the last conversation we had, we're really looking for, our goal is to walk away with either a problem statement that might need a little bit more work, or a problem statement that we're going to move forward and start talking as a group about solutions. So would really appreciate a little bit of feedback here, the way that James just framed it up on this problem statement, and if this is something that we can continue to kind of move forward with and explore solutions together on. So if you have any comments or additional considerations, please do raise your hand, and then #2 if you are on the phone only. So let's give it a moment here. All right, Callie, thank you. Let's go ahead and unmute Callie Wells, please.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I'll go ahead and chime in here. We were ones that asked for additional analysis to help kind of place some magnitude numbers around this problem statement. It's one thing to, have the problem statement, but another one to kind of test and have data to support that problem statement and the magnitude of it. So I know obviously DMM does their analysis every year in the annual reports. It's kind of backwards looking, which is why we've asked for some analysis or a similar study forward looking. I was curious if there's been any discussions around whether or not that's going to be feasible to help feed into this effort here before we kind of get, you know, going on talking potential solutions if we don't even know what the magnitude of the issue is.
Yeah, as mentioned, as I mentioned, the Department of Market Monitoring does report on structural competitiveness, and it won't be a perfect proxy for exactly how many times, you know, the CAISO balancing area would fail the BA level DCPA as it exists, but it's a reasonable way of sort of measuring the problem, if the problem exists, which is your point, and to sort of look at the magnitude of that. And then, so in terms of forward-looking, is there reason, do you think that there is reason to believe that the structural competitiveness of the CAISO balancing area would be dramatically different in the near future, or is it just sort of a curiosity about how that looks?
No, I think you have, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise. We have a ton of capacity coming online, right? We have all those procurement orders going out from the CPUC just because of our supply conditions that we've, you know, noticed in the last couple of years. And so there's a ton more capacity sitting in the queue planning on coming online in the next couple of years. So I think your supply numbers are going to drastically increase. Yeah, so obviously looking historically at the numbers that DMM puts out, I'm assuming you're referring to their annual report every year when they run their competitiveness study. That's backwards looking, and the most recent numbers we have are during knowingly tight supply conditions in the CAISO BA. So forward looking, yes, I think our supply mix is definitely going to drastically change. How much that might push the needle one way or the other, I don't know, but I wouldn't expect it to increase the level of uncompetitive conditions. If anything, I'd expect it to decrease, but I could be proven wrong, which is why that having some sort of forward-looking study and having that data to support the problem statement would be really useful.
Okay, I see what you're saying, yep. And so it would, you know, try to give, you know, because I think what your concern would be is that, well, you go through all this work, including the CAISO BA and the tests, and then if the trajectory of conditions implies, you know, the CAISO would rarely or never, you know, sort of be structurally uncompetitive as the way it's defined in whatever tests we come up with, then it's probably not worth considering in the policy.
Callie, just if we could unmute Callie. Callie, I want to make sure that I have a chance to kind of respond back to James and confirm that understanding there.
Yeah, sorry, I think I accidentally muted myself after you guys have repeatedly told us the last couple of months not to hit the mute button on my computer. I accidentally did that instead of my phone. Yeah, I think going forward with all of the extra supply coming on, that is the case. I think it kind of goes back to the history of why this exists in the EIM today, right? Was because initially at the onset, there were some BAAs that might not have had a lot of competitive conditions, and so that was why we are where we are today with the existence of a BAA level mitigation. So the question is, I think, or I guess my line of thinking is, I think the same threshold question needs to apply to the CAISO BA before we go down that path, right? Do we have that same condition in the CAISO BA to where it warrants actually applying it to the CAISO BA in the same way we did for the EIM entities? That was all, but I will not hit my mute button on my computer now in case you want to respond.
Thank you, Callie. Yes, no, let's leave it unmuted. Callie, James, I don't know, and you know, if I could jump in here, which is likely a dangerous thing. But Callie, can you help me understand then, because when we asked we are all for kind of that data-driven decision making, and I think that's crucial. That's crucial for us to do. We're making changes to the market. That's very important. But with the forward looking, I hear you on the increased supply. We're also going to have increased demand. And with these projections, can you help me kind of assess, how it is what would have you have confidence in those forward projections in essence? Like how far in advance would we go out, the further out in advance, the more assumptions you make? Help me kind of draw that threshold, so to speak, of how that data would kind of help inform this conversation for you as a stakeholder.
Yeah, I think that question alone could take a whole day workshop to go through assumptions, but I think the idea would be you take the capacity that's expected to come online. I would probably start with a year this would potentially be implemented into the market and go out maybe that year and a couple forward years. Look at what's going to be online per the CPUC orders and your guys' own interconnection queue, and use that supply mix as the starting point. And obviously the CEC and the PUC put out, forecasted demand, not just which covers the whole CAISO BA, not just the CPUC LSEs. So I think you guys do have that data out there. I think it's just a matter of putting the pieces together and looking at, starting with the year this might be expected to be implemented. And then run a similar study that the CAISO or the DMM does in their annual report every year. Just some thoughts, but again, there's a lot of assumptions that would have to be vetted, but that was just hopefully kind of to help you connect the dots.
No, I appreciate that, Callie, and I think this is likely. Yeah, there's definitely more conversation to go into that. I appreciate that, though. James, do you have any reactions? Callie, I appreciate you staying off of mute. James, anything else?
I appreciate the questions, and we'll think about it.
All right, Callie, thank you so much. Dan, let's go ahead and go to Dan Williams.
Yeah, Dan from TEA. Just support everything that Callie was asking for there, and just had the thought of, all the work that CAISO and the team have gone through for the new ways of looking at ATC for the Transmission Service Market Scheduling Priorities Initiative may be helpful in this area as well, of just some additional data points or ways to look at the external supply and its availability to reach demand within the CAISO BA. And of course, there are a lot of changes going on in markets in the West, and including, when EDAM comes in 2026, there's still going to be a large number of entities in EIM sort of operating next to that, but still also hopefully liquid and vibrant intertie market as well, that I would assume is a large part of the structural competitiveness of the CAISO BA. So it feels like there's a lot of data out there, but without knowing kind of where some of the inflection points might be within the study that DMM has performed, it's hard to say, like if on average you're getting, or on a peak day, you're getting 1,000 less megawatts of imports bid, does that remove the structural competitiveness, or is there so much headroom at that point that it doesn't matter? But those are just a few things that came to mind, and I guess the caution would be not to look too narrowly at EIM and EDAM potential transfers as the sort of pool of available resources, but to look more broadly, like Callie was talking about, and just continuing to expect a liquid and very helpful intertie market, even as markets change in the West.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Okay, let's see. We are, James, no hands, and I am not seeing any questions in the chat. Everybody, thank you so much for this very engaging conversation here. This is precisely what we are seeking in the working groups. So James, any closing thoughts, or do we want to go ahead and go to problem statement number 3?
Let's move to the next one.
Very good.
So the third problem statement is one that was sort of starting to be discussed in the November working group, the last BA level discussion, and then was prevalent in some of the comments that we received in reaction to that working group, and was already sort of discussed today. But we did want to allow the working group itself to expand on, react to this problem statement here, which is to say that the existing BA level market power mitigation test utilizes a transfer constraint-based trigger to test for structural uncompetitiveness, resulting in market power mitigation being triggered most frequently in hours that is inconsistent with when one would expect the need to test for market power. For example, in conditions where there are high renewables and low load conditions on the system generally. And so that was a reaction to some of the Department of Market Monitoring data that was presented in November, and is used to indicate the potential of some sort of problem with the trigger of the test, that the test is triggering at times where one wouldn't expect the test to trigger. And so I did want to leave this up for discussion and allow those that a chance to expand on this potentially, or if there are any stakeholders that want to react to or comment on this one.
All right. No, thank you, James. Just for everybody, I know we've been putting several of the older sessions in the chat. So what James is referencing, I just placed into the chat for you again. Slide 9 of today's presentation also has all of the links. So JK's hand is up. Let's go ahead and go to JK, please.
Hi, James and Juan, thank you. For this problem statement, I feel like there is a misconception. So that the frequency of triggering should never be a problem. The problem is the test, because we want to know whether there is true market power existing. If it is triggered but the test passes, it should not be a problem, right? It's it sounds like we're concerning, like the frequency of the triggering will only be a problem if it somehow, has a lot of false alarm, causing the test unnecessary and causing, for example, computation burden and time delays in processing the data, or market optimization. There's a time issue due to the computation. But in my opinion, the triggering frequency should not be a problem if the test is properly designed. It sounds like what is the real problem is when it is triggered, the test also failed. So that is the real problem.
Yeah, and if I can go one level deeper, JK, and you can respond. When triggered, the test fails. If the test fails when there is true uncompetitiveness, that is not a problem in my mind. But it would be the test fails and it's not well representative of true uncompetitive conditions. That would be the problem. I just wanted to see if JK agreed or didn't agree with that next step.
If we could unmute JK again, please.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I have a contractor working at home today, so I don't want you to hear the background. I agree with what James just said. So, if the test is not correctly reflecting the market power, then that is the problem, right? But if the test is correct, even that's triggered like more frequently than it needs and doesn't cause any computational issue, it should not be a problem. I agree with what you said.
Thank you.
Thank you, JK. Any other reactions or comments here to this problem statement here? All right, yep. Callie, let's go ahead and unmute Callie, please.
Yeah, hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. So I appreciated that conversation. I read this problem statement as trying to capture the issue that I think JK and James and Juan, we all discussed earlier on, where you're using a transfer constraint-based trigger for BA level or structural uncompetitiveness tests. It's that, again, the mixing and matching of elements between a local market power versus a BAA uncompetitive market conditions. And then the frequency or the time periods in which the market power mitigation is being triggered and failed is more of like a result of the initial issue or problem statement. So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I read this, was trying to capture that issue that we talked about earlier.
No, thank you, Callie. So just to make sure I understand you, because in the conversation we had earlier with JK and James and you, it was, I had it as two separate topics, and maybe they need to be two separate problem statements, right? One was the test, one was the trigger. So what you're, if I heard you correctly, you're talking about not necessarily the frequency of trigger or the situation in which it's triggered, but just what the triggering mechanism is. That's your takeaway from this problem statement?
Yeah, I think it should be a separate problem statement. I agree with having it this third one. I think, yeah, it's not, if it's being triggered when uncompetitive conditions at the BA level actually exist, and those are when mitigation is being applied, that's not an issue, right? You're mitigating for BA level market power mitigation when you should be. I think the issue is because you're trying to address system level or BA level market power mitigation or market power, but you're using a local market power mitigation trigger, that's the issue. And because you have that dynamic going on, you're now seeing the inconsistencies or the odd results that came out of DMM's analysis in terms of when market power mitigation is actually being applied at the BA level, being kind of inconsistent when you would expect it to be. So I do still think it's a separate problem, or it should be a separate problem statement specifically from the other ones.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Callie. I appreciate that. Any other comments or reactions to this? Again, right, part of it is validating these problem statements as they're presented, right? That is a key need for us to start moving forward here. So I'm going to give it another minute, but I'm not seeing anything in the chat, nor am I seeing any other hands here. So James, any closing thoughts here, or should we go ahead and move on to the next slide, which would actually be our introduction of Sylvie?
I think I'm good. Thanks, everyone, for the discussion.
Appreciate your time, James. Thank you for joining us and speaking to the group here. So, Sylvie, let's go ahead and give the floor to you.
Thanks, Juan, and thanks, James, for heading up the discussion so far. The next two slides are going to focus on how we measure the impact of market power, or how we assess the various tests that we're considering for market power mitigation. As Juan has mentioned at the beginning of our discussion today, it's really important that we align on a way to fully consider the different proposals that we're talking about during the proposal development phase, so that we can fairly compare and assess the different options that are in front of us. And we've already talked a lot about this DMM presentation from last year. So I wanted to start off the discussion with the way that DMM had performed an analysis in order to identify the potential impact of existing market power. What they did was they estimated the potential increase in megawatts due to mitigation as an indicator of successful mitigation. And they showed that this is only a small fraction of the total megawatts mitigated, and that's only a small fraction of the total megawatts subject to mitigation. And to me, this discussion really crystallized the potential benefits of BAA level market power mitigation and a grouping methodology, as well as the challenges of assessing the actual impact of market power. Also, to me, this assessment highlighted, I guess, what stakeholders have been saying so far is the mix and match methodology. To me, and maybe this is a JK language if I'm speaking math or economics, to me, the mix and match methodology isn't necessarily problematic if you think about it as an instrumental variable, where market power is really, really difficult to identify. We don't have enough information to know what's market power, when resources are just changing their bid prices in response to certain conditions. So we need to use multiple, different lenses to narrow down when market power might feasibly be exercised. So that was the approach that DMM took in looking at those two lenses from BAA level MPM. We've also been talking about the potential for market power mitigation during periods of low load, high imports, or off-peak hours, and that market power mitigation triggered during those hours indicates that the current system may not align well with its intended purpose. So I highlight here that that may not be an appropriate indication of successful market power using the existing market power tests, or the ones that we've been discussing in problem statements 1 and 2. But the second point might be appropriate for problem statement number 3. So I wanted to put both on this slide and open it up for discussion. Since moving forward, we do need to have alignment over what we're looking at and what is feasible to identify and assess in the market. So I'll stop there and see if this slightly different framework for discussion can bubble up some new thoughts.
Thank you, Sylvie. And yeah, just again, it's very important for us to have alignment on the problem statements, to have alignment on how we would assess these things, right? So if you have any thoughts, please do raise your hand. #2 if you are on phone only. Let's give it a minute here. Okay, Sylvie, I am not seeing any hands or anything coming through in the chat. I think we are good to move on to the next slide here.
All right, well, I'll reflect back the fact that we got a lot of stakeholder commentary, calls for further studies to assess and better understand market power dynamics. Again, this is not an easy feat. So, and as the previous slide indicated, there seem to be divergent approaches to how we might identify and indicate the presence of market power. So this is just a catch-all slide to note that we hear you and we'd really like to, and we're going to need your feedback to align on how we do this. So beyond these just general calls for assessment, which we agree with, I wanted to hear if there were any other ideas on how to properly identify and assess market power, or how we can compare these various approaches to market power mitigation. And I know that we've heard a lot so far, and maybe everyone's talked out. Thanks, James. So I also welcome you to put these in comments later on.
I think that we have JK with her hand up. Let's go ahead and go to JK, please.
Hi, Sylvie. Thank you for sharing the thoughts. I think, a quick and maybe more straightforward fix is to re-examine the DCPA, how it is applied to the current VA level market power mitigation, making the triggering condition and a task consistently using the same constraint will be one approach to consider. And PG&E will be happy to collaborate with the CAISO and other stakeholders on developing a new method or revising the existing method.
Excellent. Thanks, JK.
Okay. Sylvie, I'm not seeing anything further in the chat or any other hands here. But to Sylvie's point, we did have a lot of conversation kind of earlier in the session. We are also going to provide that opportunity to comment. So we look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts there. Let's go ahead and Sylvie, any kind of, you know what, Sylvie, I have a, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to kind of pose a question to you because I'd like for all of us to hear it more on kind of working group philosophy, so to speak. Could you, we spent so much time on problem statements, could you just take a little bit of time to kind of talk about, you know, the importance of coming together on like an assessment criteria, and maybe that hopefully frames things up for, you know, potential comments in the comment template itself?
Yeah, I really like the slide that you started off with, Juan, where it showed that what our process is to start with problem statement, align on a method to assess and benchmark various proposals for solutions before we go into the solution development phase. So we're really hoping to get you know, good alignment amongst the stakeholder community around how to assess the scope and degree of impact of the problem statements that we just described on problem statements 1 through 3 that we previously described. And we'll need a way to compare or benchmark the potential benefits of solutions once we start talking more seriously about solution development. So it sounds like and I've highlighted on this slide 2 different ways to go about assessing the impact of NPM. They are very different, and they do, you know, conflict in ways. So as a working group, we're going to need to find some alignment and some common ground before we can go more seriously into solution development. Was that the plug you were looking for, Juan?
No, that's exactly, I appreciate that, Sylvie. Thank you very much. And actually, why don't we go ahead before we let you go, because I think we just got a couple of other slides here. Alva's hand went up. Let's go ahead and unmute Alva, please.
I've been listening to Sylvie's comments, and I hesitate to wade into these waters, but I just want to pull back from the question of sort of the automated approaches to determining market power. To so the premise in either the EIM or the EDAM is going to be that all participants who have agreed to be part of that market have already agreed that that the CAISO is capable of determining their default energy bids. In other words, what their cost-based bids would be if they were mitigated. Would you agree with that? That's part of essentially a condition of joining the market.
Sounds right. Continue.
Yeah, and then so essentially people bid above the cost-based bids for various reasons, which would include believing that CAISO doesn't have the costs right, or that there are opportunity costs that aren't being captured by CAISO. And so, you know, the argument could be made that the market power mitigation in its automated form is not correctly assessing market power, it's over mitigating essentially, and that the proper approach would be to have some form of essentially monitoring, a DMM type monitoring to determine whether there was market power being exercised after the fact. How would, in general, how does DMM go about that process of deciding that somebody has exercised market power if there isn't a automated process or I mean there's certainly the assessment that there's pivotal suppliers that's going to be core to it, but beyond that, how would DMM make a determination somebody has exercised, in other words, exercised market power in a way that requires a complaint to FERC versus simply having a disagreement about costs?
Thanks, Alva. I appreciate the opportunity to step back for a moment. So while I can't speak for how DMM might do that, I can allude to the presentation that Nicole provided for this group, where DMM presented the analysis that I've tried to summarize on the screen. But more broadly, I really appreciate the opportunity to identify the challenges to identifying market power in general. I think one of the scenarios you alluded to is when resources, bid above the costs that are assumed by our market processes and reference levels. And that does happen a lot. Doesn't mean that those bids will be mitigated, but it could happen because a gas resource, for instance, is reacting to live gas prices that are changing more rapidly than we've updated in our system. And that could be, that might be seen as evidence of market power, but might not actually be market power. There's a lot of scenarios in which we can't tell if an increase in price is just an economic purpose or if it's because it's an attempt to withhold supply. But the opposite is also true. Market power can be exercised when prices are low because it's a relative condition, not an absolute condition. So just as we might be over-identifying market power in certain scenarios, we're probably also under-identifying market power in a lot of scenarios. So it's a big task, and maybe we can get DMM back in here to further extrapolate on the methodology that they had gone over with us at the end of last year.
Thanks. I just I've been wondering about that element of it, and I think it would be good to get some idea of how, in a sense, what's the recourse participants have when they believe they're being over mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Alva. Stuart, why don't we go ahead and unmute Stuart, please?
Thanks, Juan, and thanks, Alva. I think Alva, raises a point that was in my mind, and I think it behooves us to look at this. Is there over mitigation? Let's say it's deemed as market power. Should those generators be getting settled at a cost-based settlement? Or if, in the instance, CAISO is the competitive BA and sets an energy price in its BA that those generators' bids are getting measured against, should that be the price? I just wonder if it's worth looking at this risk of over mitigation. Particularly, Kali, highlighted some areas. It's counterintuitive when mitigation is getting triggered, but it may be good to look at that because I think it will probably be an issue for PAC and SMUD initially and EDA. Depending on how the BA level mitigations ultimately change, it could become an issue. So maybe we should look more into this over mitigation, and should we be getting settled at cost base if the reference level is higher than that actual cost base? Thanks.
Stuart, do you have any ideas on how to identify when over mitigation is occurring?
Well, if we're saying the measure is CAISO's clearing price, right? That's what it's getting measured against. in terms of triggering market power mitigation, it then becomes the energy cost is higher than that in the BA that's getting mitigated. Should those suppliers be getting mitigated down to the CAISO or what they're getting measured against that price, or should they be getting cost-based settlement? That's what I'm wondering, because as Al was pointing out, there's other factors going on that may well mean that cost-based settlement isn't truly accurate at that time, and that's what I'm pondering in his comments.
James, I see your hand.
Yeah, if I could jump in and respond, not respond, I guess, but comment and elaborate on Alvin Stewart's points. One sort of just language and terminology issue I want to try to resolve is that we don't, when we're mitigating or subjecting resources to mitigation, we're not saying that there is market power or a resource is exerting market power. Even when mitigating a resource, the better way to phrase it would be that we've identified conditions with which one could exert market power if they wanted to. And so even when, and those conditions are subject to the accuracies and inaccuracies of any given test. For example, we use 3 pivotal supplier tests, and that's the most common among the markets. If you defined competitiveness as a 1 pivotal supplier test, then you have made different assumptions about the conditions with which market power may arise. But it's not necessarily saying somebody is exerting market power any time that they fail the test. So it just sort of gets people, hopefully gets people to think about that there are conditions that folks have to agree are reasonable, and they'll never be perfect. And as Sylvie mentioned, conditions will happen where you're under mitigated or over mitigated. And it's not a measure of a resource or a scheduling coordinator's intention about what they're doing regarding the price that they're bidding. It's just to say, you know, market power mitigation, the broad reason why we do it, and all markets do it, is to the best we can ensure that markets result in competitive prices at all times of the day, at all days of the year. And when there are conditions with which that may not occur, then we try to resort you know, to something else. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I know that even for myself, the subject to mitigation, you know, could probably use a new name, right? I think for the clarity of this conversation. Callie, I see your hand up. Why don't we go ahead and unmute Callie?
Yeah, hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. James, I appreciate that clarification because I think it's a really important distinction to make, is that when we're doing these tests, we aren't saying market power has been exerted. We're just saying there's the potential for market power to exist. And I think this goes back to one of the questions Sylvie posed initially, is how do we test, or how do we figure out if market power is actually being exerted? And in my mind, it's, was there an impact to the clearing price that is during these uncompetitive conditions? And one way to possibly go about that, and I think you guys kind of hint at it in your next slide, is doing a conduct and impact test. I don't know if that's something that is feasible, and maybe the CAISO can take it back internally and talk about it, is maybe take a couple sample hours or days where the current mitigation is being triggered and applied, and then also do a conduct and impact test and see, okay, when that BA level market power mitigation was triggered and resources were mitigated, what was the, if we did a conduct and impact test, what was the actual impact on prices? Might be one way to go about it. I'm just kind of thinking off the fly here. So obviously I'll also continue to think about it, but I appreciate that distinction, James, that you made. And I think the real question is not, is there the potential for market power, but is market power actually being exercised? And we want to make sure we're mitigating during those hours and not other hours.
Thanks, Callie. Stuart, I saw your hand go up and down. Just want to make sure that was, yeah, let's go ahead and go to Stuart here, please.
I just like to say I agree, and I appreciate the distinction James made, and I agree with everything Callie's saying. But when it comes to the actual mitigation, that's my point. Should it be cost-based settlement in all instances? That's the only thing that I'm thinking in my mind. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. This has been great discussion. I want to keep an eye on time because we do want to kind of go over a couple of other things. So any other reactions, or Sylvie, if not, I'm not seeing any hands. I'm not seeing any chat questions here. Any kind of closing thoughts?
None for me.
Okay. Well, James, I see your hand. Why don't we go ahead and, let's go to you, James.
All right, I just wanted to comment on Stuart's question, and just to point out, at least in the CAISO, and I think it's consistent in other markets too, that there are two reference prices with which resource bids could be changed. It's either the cost-based price, which he mentioned, or the default energy bid, as we call it. But there's also the competitive locational marginal price, which is essentially, if you're doing local market power, you're stripping away the uncompetitive contribution to the congestion component of the LMP and saying, if the competitive price that I would be competing against outside of my local area is still higher than my cost-based bid, I can still get the competitive locational marginal price as my settlement as well. So it's not 100% a cost-based settlement if there's mitigated, because there is that competitive LMP component to it. And it'd be interesting to see when resource bids are mitigated, what proportion of the time are they mitigated to the cost-based DEB, or are they mitigated to the competitive LMP, which is just sort of a general market condition. So I just wanted to throw that out there for folks.
Thank you, James. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move to the next slide here. Sylvie, thank you so much for your time and leading that discussion there. So as Callie mentioned and as James mentioned, we wanted to talk a little bit about the considerations for solution development, right? I mean, the working groups are driving towards a goal. And so what we had from the prior comments are these three items that we'd really like to get your reaction for here. I think the first consideration would be to create a grouping methodology for BAA level MPM. The second would be to determine whether or not the CAISO should be included. I think what a lot of the conversation today was around the trigger and the test that would apply to both of these bullets. I think, we really appreciate all that conversation. I think we might have a little bit of digging to do in those areas, but I wanted to get just, if we take that higher level approach, just some feedback on those first two bullets. And then we also did have, as Callie mentioned, considering an impact test for BA level MPM. And so this is where we really want to hear from everybody here. If there's anything additional, we've had Brenda Corona here taking notes for us on all the conversation we've had here today. But if there are any kind of unstated considerations that the stakeholder community wants us to, for the good of the order, put into the conversation here. So, Dan, I see your hand is up. Let's go ahead and unmute Dan. And again, I'd really encourage everybody to, if you don't have an immediate thought, noodle on this, so to speak. because we'd really like to hear feedback in your comments. So Dan, let's go ahead and give the floor to you.
Yeah, Dan from TEA. So I guess one of the things that comes to mind for me when looking at this is just kind of the timing of any changes that may come from this specific portion of the initiative, because if we're looking at, you know, kind of 2026, maybe even 2027, it's not a stretch to say that things will look different with, you know, the CAISO BA and the PAC BA and SMUD in EDAM versus maybe 2-3 more years down the road when there are more participants. And so that creates a different day-ahead market power mitigation kind of environment than what will be there in real time, where kind of then this BA level grouping may just feel more kind of fruitful or useful. Not a fully formed thought, but I just kind of, it stood out just that there is kind of a reality testing a little bit here with kind of where the solution's pointed and how it would impact the day-ahead market versus real-time market, and when.
Yeah, no, Dan, I appreciate that. Any reactions to that comment? I think I get what you're saying, Dan. There's it's crystallizing, and I think that the timing has come up time and time again. You know, we draw the parallels to BA level MPM and WIM. If you go back to I think it was session number 4 that we have the link. You know, as James kind of alluded to a little bit earlier in this session, as we had more and more people participating, it had more and more of a kind of a different flavor to it. So appreciate you sharing that. Any reactions to that, or anyone want to kind of add on? Or go ahead, or you yourself.
Yeah, I guess just thinking about how it works to have a different footprint in day ahead versus in real time. And I don't have an answer to that, but just thinking about what if there's a situation where, say, PacifiCorp is mitigated in day ahead, but then there are significantly more participants in real time, and that you know, produces different solutions. What's the sort of good, bad, or otherwise of that, or is it even, you know, a meaningful thing from a price formation perspective?
Okay, Dan, got it. Thank you. I think I understand now. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, let us take that one back and see if maybe we can illustrate that in some way. Any other reactions or any other considerations that the community would like for us to take into account here? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or in the chat. If we could go ahead and move to the next slide, please. So I think this came up in earlier conversation, but we did want to show that we have heard, you know, some of the key areas that we need to do to address any of the concerns or suggestions, like the one that Dan just made, by this community during kind of that policy development or solution development phase of the working group. And I think the first, we've had a lot of you know, calls for publishing or clarifying and sharing information. I think one of the mechanisms that we'd like to employ, I kind of alluded to it at the open here, was a different way for us to engage with these. And really, it would be the publishing of a detailed FAQ, and this would be a living document that we could kind of continuously go back to in a centralized area, and really collaborate on those solutions within this working group setting. I think that after today's conversation, we likely are going to have a little bit more conversation here around BA level MPM, but I think we're getting really close here. And we look forward to kind of continuing that engagement and collaboration, and really that detailed feedback, right? That's crucial for us, because not only is it informing us, the ISO, of the stakeholder sentiment, but I think even today we had a lot of examples of conversations amongst stakeholders, and I think that is really something that we really need to have in this working group in order to come to a good solution that works for everybody. So, and then as Sylvie kind of led us through that assessment of the impacts, and I think we're still there if we go back to that original slide of kind of where we are in that iterative process on the bottom right. The assessment of the impacts of those potential solutions. So we appreciate all the feedback, the things for us to consider with solutions, and then we're definitely taking this back to come back to this team, to this community with some example exercises to kind of further illustrate. So if we could just quickly move to the next slide. I apologize, I'm going to fly through these. We're at good discussion. Always want to leave room for good discussion though. Just want to kind of characterize some of the feedback that we had received via comment. So we did have several stakeholders support that exploration of perhaps a grouping approach. Again, I think we had a lot of conversation today about the trigger and what the test is, but I'm not hearing anything really kind of outside of, potentially exploring that grouping. We'll look forward to hearing more detail from you on those comments in case today's conversation kind of changed your mind. We definitely heard that need for clarity and further information. Again, stay tuned for that FAQ document and the mechanism to kind of get those requests in here. We do appreciate the engagement within working groups, so do rest assured that if you've shared it here in the working group, we have a dedicated individual here who's capturing all of those things. We have it captured, we've heard you, and we appreciate you sharing it in the working group itself. And if we could move to the next slide real quick. I think this is kind of alluding to what we had just recently here at the end of the session with Sylvie's conversation. We did hear some entities expressing concern about the current criteria and conditions in which it's triggered. And I think we really dove into that issue, and we'll likely need a little bit more conversation on that, in particular the triggering of the tests. And for further studies and analysis, Callie, I would hear you on that forward looking. I think it's a challenge. So maybe I think you said it would take an entire session for all the assumptions made. We would really look to stakeholders to inform us on what they need. So give us a little bit of time on this comment template for the session today. I think I'd like to maybe make a couple of edits to it so that we can hear, what exactly is it that we need on that kind of an analysis, right? Forward-looking and projection, a lot of assumptions. Let's dive into that, and I think that really kind of helps us on feasibility and what that informs us of. So appreciate everybody's time. We're right on the dot. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide and hand the floor off to Brenda Corona to close.
Thank you, Juan. So for today, we have the last few reminder announcements for the annual policy initiatives roadmap process for 2024. We do invite everyone to submit potential discretionary initiatives for the 2024 annual policy roadmap and catalog. The submission deadline is coming up next week on the 28th. The link here on the comment template, as well as the process page here. We do have any questions, feel free to send them over to isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. We did send out a notice a few weeks ago, just a reminder, but we haven't seen many submissions in, so if you have time, you have now to Wednesday of next week. The next is to save the date for the 2024 Stakeholder Symposium that will be held on October 29th and 30th. The 29th will be a welcome reception, and the 30th will be the 8 to 4 p.m. Symposium of all the panels and Senate Symposium events that we have planning for everyone. So registration, we're targeting about maybe May. We'll let you know on the exact date of that, but I will give you guys a heads up that we do have Stakeholder Symposium on the 30th. So make sure you do RSVP and also sign up for that when we do kick off our registration. But besides that, we thank you all for participating, and we look forward to seeing you at our next working group meeting. We will have this recording and presentation is available now, and then we'll have some other comment template sent out with a target email for those who aren't able to see the notice when we do send that out. But thanks so much, and I'll send it back to Adrian, my event producer.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you everyone for attending today's meeting. You may now disconnect.